Hi and welcome to Stephan Livera podcast, a show about Bitcoin. Today for episode 331, my guest is Eric Sirion, or aka Eric Sirion. We're talking about MiniMint, and so this is around Federated Mints. This is actually, in some sense, it's a advancement of an older idea of Xiaomi and eCash. So the idea is Federated Mints, and that you could deposit in an IOU, and we're going to talk through the process, deposits, withdrawals, internal transfers, and then how Lightning comes into it as well. But essentially, this is an interesting area of research. It's being actually sponsored by Blockstream. And so we talk about some of the benefits for Bitcoin users from a Bitcoin scaling and privacy point of view, as well as the custodial and trust trade-offs, as well as where we see this going. Is this potentially the future for community custody? This show is brought to you by Swan Bitcoin, the easy way to accumulate and learn about Bitcoin. And now Swan is bringing back gifting. So Swan actually started as Give Bitcoin, and later that product had to get taken away, and now it's back. We've got the holidays coming up, and if you want to gift Bitcoin to your loved ones, swanbitcoin.com/gifts. You can gift Bitcoin, and you're giving them, alongside that, you're giving them access to Swan's world-class education and customer service. You create a custom gift, your recipient gets an email, they can claim it in 7 days. And so they create their Swan account and convert that USD value into Bitcoin. So that website is swanbitcoin.com/gift. Lend at HODL HODL is a peer-to-peer Bitcoin-backed lending platform where you can lend or borrow stablecoins globally and anonymously using Bitcoin as collateral. And you don't have to use KYC to do this. With Lend at HODL HODL, you no longer need to sell your Bitcoin to get some short-term liquidity. You can borrow stablecoins against your Bitcoin, and you still control 1 out of 3 keys in the multi-signature escrow throughout the whole deal. Now, on the other hand, if you have stablecoins like USDT on Liquid, you can use that to earn some interest by lending out stablecoins, and you define the terms and the APR for those deals. So go and sign up. The website is lend.hodlhodl.com. If you want to get started with Bitcoin mining, Compass Mining can help. CompassMining.io is the website. You can go there, you can select an ASIC machine, and they've got new ones and also secondhand machines available on the Compass marketplace. And so then you select a hosting facility where your machine is going to be operated. There are mining facilities all in different countries, and you can select the mining pool that you point your hash rate towards, and you're receiving Bitcoin. Now, you're paying hosting, but this is an easy way to get access to power rates that otherwise wouldn't be feasible for most people in residential power rates. Now, the Compass offer a lot of content as well. They've got podcasts and blogs and a newsletter also, so go and check them out. It's compassmining.io. On to the show with Eric. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hello. Yeah, happy to be on. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, so Eric, it was great to read about your proposal and read about what's going on with MiniMint and all this stuff, and I think it's definitely a topic that SLP listeners will be interested to hear about, ideas related to this, privacy, scalability, all sorts of things. So do you want to give us a little bit of your background, that you'll, as much as you're willing to share without doxing, of course?
Yeah, sure. My background is in computer science, and especially in distributed systems and cryptography. So that naturally led me to explore different systems like Liquid on Bitcoin and federations, Byzantine fault tolerance. And at some point I had this idea for Xiaomi and eCash and building it on Bitcoin. That's why we're here today.
Excellent. And so for listeners who are not familiar, what is Xiaomi and eCash?
Yeah, most simply explained, I think it's a way to exchange some asset that has value, for example, Bitcoin, for an IOU token. And that IOU token has this nice property that it's fully anonymous. You engage in a protocol with the, let's call it mint, because we can say it's like a minting process when these IOU tokens are created, and you send the mint some amount of money, and in return you get IOU tokens, and later on when you want to spend them, the mint can't recognize during which issuing operation they were actually created, so you're fully anonymous, which is great.
Right, and so listeners who are maybe new to Bitcoin, you might recognize that Chalmian eCash and this whole idea by David Chalm is arguably like a predecessor idea to Bitcoin. It's been around for a while before Bitcoin. Obviously, there's certain distinctions between this idea of like a IOU token, because obviously in Bitcoin we're also all about this idea of not your keys, not your coins, don't trust IOUs, etc. But why would we even look at these IOUs? What are the benefits of this kind of system and the trade-offs versus literally just hodling Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because like Chalmian eCash has been around since the early 80s, but it never really caught on. And my theory for why is that you always had the centralized entity, the mint, which controlled all the money and thus could easily either exit scam their users or could be taken down by a hostile government. And they tend to be hostile against like anything that has to do with anonymity and privacy. So it's no wonder that we don't see big Chalmian mints today. But what they didn't have back then was a way to hold an asset in a distributed manner. And we have that today. Like with Bitcoin, you can hold value in a multisig wallet. And that means, for example, if you have a 2 or 3 multisig wallet, that only if 2 or 3 people cooperate, they can actually spend the Bitcoin. And that made it really interesting to revisit the concept of Chalmian eCash. Because now we don't need to have the centralized entity, but could still get the privacy properties from the Chalmian eCash protocol. And in the way we do this is the backing funds are now held in a multisig wallet, while also the issuing operation of these tokens can be distributed using fancy cryptography. We probably don't need to get into this here, but essentially you're taking the Chalmian mint and you split it up into multiple parts, and now a certain amount of these parts can become malicious, actively malicious, without the whole being badly influenced.
Right, and so essentially it offers different characteristics, and now with Bitcoin and multi-signature technology allowing us to have multiple people who are signing a transaction, we're sort of taking that idea even further. So it's kind of like you've got Bitcoin where typically people are thinking of like, oh, I've got my coins in my hardware wallet or in my, whatever. Then you might have Liquid as an example, which is a federation, and people peg in and peg out, and so it's a side chain. And then taking it even further is this idea of the Federated Mint. And so that's what you're explaining here. So could you tell us a little bit about this idea of a Federated Mint? Like, how would it work? Who would sign up to be a member? How would you use it?
Yeah, like the main benefits, as we already touched on, are one, privacy. That's what I already mentioned, and also scalability to some degree, because mints also allow you to do internal transactions with these eCash tokens, and that's the second big reason why we might want them. And so to the question, who would potentially be users, I guess like most people actually that want to use Bitcoin in some way. And why? Because, like, the biggest problem, or one of the biggest problem Bitcoin has today is scalability. And we can solve this to some degree with Lightning, but Lightning is really cumbersome to run from an end user's point of view. And so even today we see many people using custodial solutions. And these people that today use custodial solutions, these are my primary target audience. Of course, everyone else who wants some privacy can use Federated eCash too, but the primary audience are users of fully custodial services today, because for them it's a clear improvement over the state of affairs right now. And who would run these federations? I can only theorize about that, but for example, I can imagine your local community, if you're living in a village in El Salvador, probably has some technical people, and they can be the federation members while the others are only users. And we are already seeing this with Galoy and Bitcoin Beach Wallet. They have a very similar approach, a bit more manual and without the privacy properties, but essentially they're running the same model there, and it works, and it's great. And what I want to see is many of these federations distributed around the world, and you just choose whichever federation you want to trust, because you might already have an existing trust relationship, especially in your local community. It's not a big deal to maybe trust some of your neighbors, you're trusting them anyway. And since no single one of them has full control over your funds, there's also not so much risk that they just run away one day because of some long tail event, like some Black Swan event, because they would still need to convince others to defect with them.
I see. Yeah. And so just for listeners who, just so everyone can follow along, you might be interested in the earlier episode I did with the Bitcoin Beach guys, but a quick high level is this idea is it is a custodial Lightning wallet, and people can onboard to the Bitcoin Beach wallet. It's a custodial wallet, and they can send and receive Lightning, and it's interoperable with the broader Lightning network. But in the background, they also have on-chain storage, and that is done with a multi-signature. So listeners could think of this Federated Mint or MiniMint idea as sort of like a competitor idea to that, but in a similar way that theoretically there could be lots of these mints around the world. People could be trading in an IOU way, but that could arguably be a little bit better, or maybe a little bit more private, and maybe a little bit more scalable. And the idea, as I'm understanding from you, is that it could still be interoperable with other mints around the world, and you could sort of swap in and out of mints and into on-chain or into Lightning, but potentially.
Yeah, like that's a central part of my more recent research into this idea. Like initially, I was just thinking about the federated eCash part and like how to build it on Bitcoin using on-chain like primitives. But the more I thought about it, the more it became clear to me that if we have the mint only able to interact with on-chain Bitcoin, then it will be a big centralizing force because people couldn't easily switch between different mints. And if they would want to, then there'd either have to be some trust relationship, which is not good because that just becomes like this old banking network where banks trust each other and settle their payments at the end of the day. We don't want this as Bitcoiners. So biggest like improvement after that point was integrating Lightning. And with the help of some people, some other developers, I figured out how to integrate both incoming and outgoing Lightning transactions with federated eCash. And that essentially makes it into a supercharged Lightning wallet. Like now you have a fully anonymous Lightning wallet that can interact with any other Lightning node, like through invoices. And the other Lightning node on the other end might be another mint, might not be another mint. You don't even have to know. So it forms this network of federations included in a bigger Lightning network, which I think is quite beautiful.
Right, yeah, that's really interesting. So we'll get into some more around that later. I think it'd be good to just talk through some of the high-level ideas, like so deposit, withdraw, internal transactions. Right. If you could tell us a little bit, what does it look like? So, okay, as an example, I bring my, 10 million sats, and I want to deposit them into the mint. What does that look like? What's going on under the hood when I deposit my 10 million sats?
Right. Let's assume for a moment that you have on-chain Bitcoin and want to deposit these into the mint. Then what you do is much like with Liquid. People might not be familiar with this, so I will explain it for a moment. You generate yourself an address which you know is related to the Federation's public keys in a certain way. We call the operation done there key tweaking. Like you add some secret value to public key, and that gives you a new public key. And you can do this to all the Federation's public keys and then generate the multisig address that way because you know the public descriptor of the Federation. And then you send your Satoshis, your 10 million Satoshis to this generated address. Now, the mint can't yet do anything with these coins because it doesn't even know it owns them. So in the next step, what you do is you show the mint the secret value you used for tweaking. And by doing so, you also verify yourself that it was actually you who sent these funds there. Because no one else could have known the secret tweaking value which led to this address. And the secret tweaking value is also needed to even spend these coins. So by giving it to the mint, you transfer the ownership in a sense. And in return, the mint will issue you a certain amount of these eCash tokens. Because one thing that really needs to be mentioned here, to be anonymous, these eCash tokens need to have a common denomination. And that might be like 1 Satoshi. And like in the really naive model, you would now get 10 million of these eCash tokens. But that wouldn't be very efficient. So in the more like engineered version of this, you would get instead like 1 eCash token that is worth 10 million sats, or like 10 eCash tokens that are worth 1 million sats, depending on how you want to manage your eCash tokens. That's up to the user. And you would engage in this interactive issuing process, essentially. And once you have the eCash tokens, the mint can't tell anymore in exchange for which Bitcoin transactions these were initially issued. And you can do whatever you want. Like you can send them to another user, like physically send the data to another user, and then the user can go to the mint and exchange them for new eCash tokens. That would be like a transaction, kind of, because by giving the eCash token back to the mint, you validate if it was already spent. So you really need to do this to avoid double spends. And the user who received your tokens then gets fresh tokens. You don't know anything about them. The mint doesn't know anything about them. So it's fully anonymous again. Or what you could also do is use some of the tokens to generate new on-chain outputs by telling the mint, please give me 1 million set on-chain output to this address, and I give you this 1 million Satoshi eCash token. Or also give the mint some Lightning invoice and tell them, please pay this for me, and I will give you the equivalent amount of eCash tokens in exchange. So there are a lot of options you have to interact with the mint.
Right, and so we could think of it like, so those listeners who are used to Lightning, they could sort of, in a loose sense, think of it like a swap server, kind of. Like you can swap in Bitcoin on-chain and swap it out to Lightning.
Pretty much.
Sort of, in a weird way. And so, essentially, we are potentially getting more privacy for the user who, I guess, presumably, they might connect over Tor or some kind of anonymization net layer or network. And so then the idea is this federated mint doesn't know who I am, right? For all intents and purposes, I'm just this other person on the other side of the internet. I didn't have to do KYC, know your customer rules. I didn't have to provide my ID. And yet I can peg in some Bitcoin into this system and transact around inside that system in the private eCash tokens, and then when I need to, pay out to a Lightning invoice or swap it out to a Bitcoin on-chain address, correct?
Exactly. And the beauty of the system is that really there aren't any accounts, like at least in the pure eCash version. Every time you connect to the mint, you could do it using a different Tor circuit. Like at least in the final version, it will be the way you do it. Like currently in my implementation, it isn't the way yet. But in the final version, you should use a different Tor circuit every time. So you can't be correlated. Like if you do multiple operations after each other, then the mint won't be any wiser who did this. Because the eCash tokens are fully anonymous. Like you have an anonymity set of every eCash token ever issued of the same denomination. Like if you imagine Alice, Bob, and Carol getting like each one eCash token issued, and then someone spends an eCash token, then the mint can't tell if it's Alice, Bob, or Carol. It's just not possible to tell.
I see, yeah.
So it gives you a very high amount of anonymity, and especially with Lightning, like all the attacks on Lightning privacy are essentially that you surveil channels and that you correlate like payments to node IDs. But in this way, like multiple users are using the same Lightning node. So it gives you the entire Federation user base as an anonymity set, which is quite a nice improvement in my opinion, because neither the mint can tell anything. Like they only see someone is spending eCash tokens to pay a Lightning invoice. Like they can maybe learn something from Lightning invoice, but you can strip it from of the description and some of the metadata. You can just take it out of there because it's not needed. Like the only thing they really learn is to whom you pay, and even that can be solved eventually. Like I remember you had Bastian Tetenier on your podcast, and you discussed some ways to do this, like to even hide the recipient of a payment. And once this lands for Lightning, then such a federated eCash mint would be the ultimate private Lightning wallet.
Yeah, really fascinating to think about. And so, as an example, let's say we've got this network of, I don't know how many, tens, thousands of mints out there. Tell me if this idea makes any sense. Like, let's say, as an example, I put in my 10 million sats, I receive my 1 million sat eCash tokens. Would it make sense to ever try to swap across to different federated mints? Or is it more just like I am placing a little bit more trust into this one particular mint who I got those IOU tokens from?
I actually did some research on that because there was a discussion on Twitter some time ago. If it's better to, let's say you have a mint with 4 participants, a federation with 4 participants, and would it be better to evenly split your funds over these 4 participants individually, or to form a federation and put all your funds into the federation? And actually the answer depends on with which probability you assume any single participant to defect, like assuming they're independent actors and are not correlated in any way. And as long as your expectation is like below 20% defection rate, you should really just leave it in one big federation. That depends a little bit on federation size and some other factors, but generally the federation is safer. The main drawback, I'd say, is that the larger you make the federation, the slower it becomes. Like all the BFT consensus algorithms, they scale badly with the size of the federation. So eventually you want to set a limit to the federation size. And so maybe for some people it makes sense to diversify over multiple federations. But then again, it makes payments harder because at least currently I'm planning to implement payments in a way that you can only use funds from one federation for a Lightning payment, let's say. And so you'd have to switch back to one federation before making like a big payment of all your funds going somewhere else. So it's a trade-off. But generally, I imagine in the future, when there are multiple of these federations, they all speak an interoperable protocol. So if you have a client that could totally like just support multiple federations, and you could have funds in multiple federations.
Right.
Just makes engineering a bit more, bit harder, and maybe UX a little bit less easy.
Okay. And so as an example for that user with, presumably they have some kind of wallet that manages their eCash tokens, and they, I guess, would that wallet now have to manage balances across multiple federated mints as an example? Or is it more like maybe the model might be more like an exchange or let's say a Bitcoin beach or some other town or some area who wants to set it up? Everyone just has a wallet and that wallet just connects only to that one federated mint for Lightning payments, Bitcoin payments, you name it.
Yeah, I think in practice it will be like that you only have one mint you call your home mint, and that's where you keep all your funds. And like if someone from another mint wants to pay you, then you can just generate a Lightning invoice. And like your local mint generates this Lightning invoice and will give you the funds after it's paid. There are some tricks to do this. And so it doesn't really make sense for most users, in my opinion, to hold funds on multiple mints. Maybe if they're in different communities, it might make a little bit of sense because like if you're paying purely internally, you cut out the Lightning part, so it gets a little bit faster. But in the end, I think for most users, it's easiest also from a mental model perspective. You need to make this understandable to users to have good UX. Of course. That in the end, you just choose one mint, one federation you trust, and then you use them and don't care about anything else.
Right. And so, so I think really it's sort of similar to how, if you think how the Bitcoin Beach wallet works, when they create a Lightning invoice, any other Lightning wallet can just pay that invoice. And so it's a similar kind of idea that this mint is its own. Each of these mints are around there, and your wallet would connect to that mint, as an example. So we spoke a little bit about deposit. We've spoken a little bit about withdrawing. So I guess you're spending out of the mint. You're kind of withdrawing your eCash tokens in that sense, or you're paying out a Lightning invoice. And then internal transactions, is there, obviously, that would be kind of the easiest of the category because you would just be paying internally to some other person who's also a part of your mint, right?
Yeah, like I already explained how you could just give these eCash tokens to someone else. That would be the simplest internal transaction.
I see, yeah.
And they can go to the mint and request newly issued tokens in exchange for burning the old ones. And that would give them like full access to their newly received coins because now they know they were in double spend. But in practice, I don't expect this to happen that much because it's an UX problem again. So if you now have to decide, do I want to generate like an internal invoice or an external invoice? That doesn't really work that well because then people need to know, are we on the same mint and what kind of transaction?
Very practical to do that. Yeah,
exactly. Like it's the same problem Chivo has currently in El Salvador. Like you never really know if the one who is generating your invoice, are they generating Chivo invoice or Lightning invoice? So it's a big mess, and you really want to avoid this. So instead, what I'd be doing is, even if two people are on the same federation, you can still generate an invoice, but the federation just recognizes internally, we don't really have to pay it over Lightning because we own both sides of the equation, and we can just settle it internally. So that's no big deal.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. Okay, and so I guess that's the other question. As people are using this kind of idea, maybe, I mean, there's different ways it could work, but maybe one way is people might have most of their coin on, say, their hardware wallet or their multi-signature setup, and then maybe the amount that they keep inside the mint is more like the day-to-day spending amount. Is that potentially one way you're seeing it, so that like they wouldn't be risking all of their funds, they're just risking a small portion? Is that how you're seeing it, or do you see it another way?
Yeah, in the beginning, definitely. I mean, there are different use cases for this technology. Like the one you're mentioning is Bitcoin users today that might even be able to run their own Lightning node financially and technically. They might want some privacy, because Lightning isn't the end-all be-all for Bitcoin privacy, so that would still be an improvement. And if you only risk some day-to-day spending funds, that's definitely okay with Federation. Like it would probably even be okay in like a single mint, like a single segment. But like down the road, what I imagine is that people might actually keep their entire net worth, like especially in poorer countries where your entire net worth might be a few $100s, might keep it all in such a federation. And that's the market where I think it will have the most positive impact, because that's a market that is traditionally underserved because it doesn't make sense for banks to be there. Like, say, El Salvador. Most people don't even have a bank account. I think I read somewhere that like more people have Chivo wallet than a bank account, which is amazing, like after a few months. So in these markets, people might not be able to actually have on-chain Bitcoin. And that's where it actually makes sense to have this federation, to have all this complication from distributed protocols and all the stuff. Because if you have all your life savings in such a protocol, then it really needs to be secure. And you can only achieve this via distribution, via like having multiple parties that run it. And so down the road in these communities, I think there might be people that only rely on such federations to make their payments, to save. And there's some interesting ideas about this we can maybe discuss later.
Yeah. Okay. And so for, like, to be clear again, the users of this mint are essentially trusting the operators of that mint to not run away with the money, right? Like, that's the IOU part. Like, they could run away with the actual on-chain funds, the actual Bitcoin, right? But the trade-off here is essentially that these are people who might have otherwise been custodial with an exchange, or custodial just like never, or only having paper Bitcoin in the sense of having, let's say, GBTC or one of those like paper synthetic exposure to Bitcoin, as opposed to having some way to actually pull it out and claim it on chain or into a Lightning wallet or into something.
Yeah, definitely. Like the people I was talking about that might have all their money in a federation, they would never really have a chance to go on chain. Like they would be on a custodial solution either way. And the big benefit of a federation is that even if, like, let's say we have a four-member federation, then one may be malicious and it all keeps working. Like you can still make payments, still works. Like if two are malicious, then the operation, it's not operational anymore. So you can't make payments anymore, and they might try to extort you. But they still can steal funds. That's the big part. And only if 3 or 4 people go malicious, then they could actually take the funds, which in my opinion is a much better chance of keeping your funds than on most exchanges.
Right. Yeah.
Like especially if these people are someone you kind of know, like they have trust of the community, and they would burn a lot of social capital, and it might make it not worth it to cooperate and just take all the money.
Right, yeah.
Especially if these mints don't get too big. Like the idea is behind having many of these and having them interoperable, that none becomes too big to fail. Like they should all stay rather small and like in their community, so that we never have systemic risks to Bitcoin.
I see, yeah. And in fairness, there are a lot of exchange users who just leave it and trust the exchange. And obviously, in years gone by, there have been exchanges who have been very lax about their security and have been operating with, say, a single signature setup where maybe the CEO of the company or one person could just steal all the Bitcoin.
Or so Dyson India.
This is obviously this is like quite a strict improvement on that. So that's an interesting idea. Now, we were talking about fee savings and scalability. I guess maybe this is a little bit of a how long is a piece of string question, but could you outline for people how they should think about the fee saving or scalability win here?
Like on a purely technical level, the first saving comes from multiple people sharing one Lightning node. And that's something that could also be achieved using, what was it called? Channel factories, where multiple people share UTXOs and share a set of channels. But channel factories are still very theoretical right now, and also will require people to be online all the time. And that's, in my opinion, not quite suitable for the demographic I'm targeting. And so the big benefit here is that, let's say you have 100 or 1,000 people in your local community, and instead of everyone managing their own Lightning node, which means at least opening one channel and eventually closing it, now you maybe have one node that has 10 channels. And that reduces the amount of on-chain transactions by 10 to 100x in that scenario. Apart from that, of course, you also hold some on-chain UTXOs as the backing funds of the Federation, but I think their movement will be negligible compared to rebalancing Lightning channels, which would probably be a much more common scenario. And so it's definitely a big improvement in scalability. And also, when you're not using Lightning, especially in the local community context, if everyone is on the same mint, then you can essentially make definitely many transactions, as many as you want, as long as the computers running the Federation members' servers, as long as they're fast enough to process all the requests.
Yeah, and
that's the only limiting factor, and that could be hundreds of transactions per second.
Yeah, I see. And so potentially that could be huge fee savings then, because many, let's say, hundreds or thousands of users could all be operating off of one mint, and all of their payments and receiving information is being essentially bundled into this entity, as opposed to each of those people opening their own Lightning channels, doing their own everything. Of course, there's certain trade-offs around this, but as we mentioned earlier, these are the people who might have been custodial users anyway. And so also one other thing you mentioned, the idea of channel factories, or also known as multi-party channels. And so that would require any prev out, which is another potential future soft fork upgrade. And so Christian Decker and AJ Towns and people like that are working on that kind of idea or have written about it. Are there any changes to Bitcoin required for this MiniMint idea?
Not really. There never was any necessity, but now with Taproot we actually have an upgrade path where we can take the federated on-chain wallet and make the transactions much smaller, because now instead of needing these, let's say we have a 3 out of 4 federation, then right now we need to include 3 signatures and 4 public keys with each transaction. And instead what we can do now is bundle them all together into one Schnorr public key, one Schnorr signature, using some special signature protocol like Frost. And now we have much smaller transactions that are also indistinguishable from any other Taproot transaction, which is great.
I see, yeah. And so for listeners who are unfamiliar with that one, go and check out the earlier episode 200 with Christian Decker, or perhaps the earlier episode, the panel discussion with from TabConf about Bitcoin on-chain scaling. And so, Eric, the other question I've got for you is, what's required for the Federation runners, like the Uncle Jims of this Federation, or what kind of work are they doing in this? Is it essentially they're helping manage a multi-sig of the on-chain outputs, and then potentially also helping manage the Lightning node that's, I guess, attached to this MiniMint? Is that the idea?
Yeah, we haven't been talking about the actual way to integrate Lightning with this all that much yet. So there is a distinction to be made between the Federation proper, which holds all the funds and is secure and N out of M multisig, and there's also an external entity, which I call the Lightning Gateway, which actually makes all the Lightning transactions. And the Federation merely incentivizes this Lightning Gateway to do the transactions the user wants. So for the actual Federation members, all they have to do is run some software that is configured in a certain way that all the nodes connect to each other, and you run it and forget about it, more or less. That's at least the idea. Then the Lightning Gateway, it's a little bit more complicated. That actually needs active management because it's a Lightning node. You need to balance channels and open new ones, close old ones. There you really need someone technical. Like for the Federation members, you can actually say, like, as long as someone can install a piece of software and keep a computer running consistently and in a secure enough manner, then they can do it. With the Lightning node, it's more complicated. You need an expert.
Back to the show in a moment. Unchained Capital are making it easy to set up your Bitcoin multi-signature security with collaborative custody. So you hold 2 hardware wallets and they hold 1 key, and you obviously keep your keys in different locations. Now, if you bring 2 hardware wallets to unchained.com, you can sign up and do this for free. Otherwise, if you are interested to get some more hand-holding, they've got a concierge onboarding program, which is very popular. You can purchase the program. They will ship you 2 hardware wallets. You'll have a video call to get set up, and they will then deposit $1,000 of Bitcoin in your vault. With Bitcoin security, it's important to remove single points of failure, and so this can give you some more peace of mind in your Bitcoin security and hodling. So go to unchained.com, select the concierge onboarding program, and use the code Livera for a discount there. When it comes to Bitcoin hardware security, coinkite.com is the place to go. They offer the Cold Card. So the Cold Card is a Bitcoin hardware wallet. You can generate the keys, store the private keys, and sign messages using those private keys. Now, if you are new, you can directly plug that wallet into the computer using laptops like Spectre Desktop, Sparrow, and Electrum. Otherwise, if you are intermediate or advanced, you can use a micro SD card to move that information back and forth, whether that is the wallet XPub or it is a transaction that you're moving back and forth. Cold Card offers all sorts of features like a Duress pin, BrickMe pin, Seed XOR. You can run passphrases on it. It's got an address explorer, all sorts of other features, and it's just an excellent all-round tool that you can use as part of your Bitcoin security setup. So go to coinkite.com and order your gear there using the code Livera for a discount. And finally, Brains. Brains are a Bitcoin mining company through and through. They have unique and cutting-edge projects such as Brains OS Plus, which is firmware for your ASIC. So go and check the website out and see whether they support your ASIC machine. You might be able to use the auto-tuning feature to get more bang for your buck. They also operate Slush Pool, which was the first mining pool. They've mined over 1.25 million Bitcoins. They offer a range of features like the ability to change how your payouts work. They've got dark mode. If you're operating Brains OS Plus firmware, you actually get 0% pool fee, so that's also a cool feature. Brains are also the creators and are driving adoption of Stratum v2, the next generation pooled mining protocol. So make sure you go and check them out. The website for that is brains.com. That's brains with 2 I's. Back to the discussion with Eric. Right, so essentially they would need a routing node operator to do that role. Of course, they can use tooling like, the likes of ThunderHub and Amboss and Lightning Terminal and RTL and so on. But they would need to know how to operate the nuts and bolts of that. And then from a privacy point of view, let's explore that a little bit. So currently, people who want to be private in Bitcoin today, it generally requires the use of various or multiple privacy techniques. You might be using, say, CoinJoin to mask your on-chain footprint. You might be using Tor to sort of anonymize or mask your internet, your IP footprint. So with the MiniMint idea, the privacy aspect mostly comes down to the anonymity set of the different amounts. So let's say you've got a 1 million sat IOU token or eCash token and a 10 million sat. I mean, I guess that's similar to how, let's say, in some of the CoinJoin implementations, they have set fixed amounts, like 1 million sats, 5 million sats, 50 million sats. It's kind of similar in that sense because they're creating an anonymity set that whoever was paying out could have been any one of those people, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the same problem they're trying to solve with this. And I think for MiniMint it won't be a big deal because as long as most people are in the same range of net worth, let's say, then they should have a similar distribution among their different denomination eCash tokens. What could be problematic if you have one really rich guy in your local community and everyone knows he's rich.
Right.
And no one else has nearly as much capital as he has. And then he might be the only one who keeps like 10 million SAT eCash tokens around. Like he's the only one who gets issued these. And that would be a problem because you could definitely identify his transactions because only he would spend these high-value eCash tokens or receive these high-value eCash tokens. And so if you have a huge disparity in net worth, then it might make sense for the richer people to keep more of the lower denomination tokens. But in practice, why would you do this? If you have enough money, then please take some money out of the federation. You can store it in an on-chain UTXO. Especially if you have 10 million or 100 million Satoshi, then that's will probably be always worth having an on-chain UTXO. For smaller amounts, maybe not. We don't know. But for such huge amounts, I think 100 million, should it be 0.1 Bitcoin? I don't know exactly, but sounds like it.
Yeah.
You probably want to have this as a UTXO owned in your hardware wallet or even your own multisig setup, something like that.
Yeah, I see. So
I don't see the big problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, the idea is there would be a big enough number of people all using the eCash tokens, and of the similar amounts, right? The 1 million SAT or whatever amount, or 100,000 SAT or however much, and whenever they are making payments or swapping out, it's all kind of mixed around and balanced around because of that. And so then privacy then is helped and protected a little bit, because now you're not trusting one central entity not to dox those individuals. And presumably in this idea, these individuals could have signed up for that mint without KYC. So that's actually that's the other interesting part, that they could operate the mint without that. And I mean, maybe as another example, let's imagine some of the Bitcoin exchanges of today, they might be able to provide a privacy benefit to their users, because they could have had to maybe KYC that user on the way in on the website. But actually, if they could provide them a MiniMint way to spend, then they're kind of spending still in a private way. So
that's an interesting.
Although
idea.
It depends if the regulators would be okay with that, or the compliance team would be okay with that. They might not, and then so
I had to talk with some people interested in issuing securities using the same eCash technique, and there the idea was you KYC essentially on every when you enter the system or when you exit the system, but what you do in between, nobody really cares.
Right.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of stable coins, even like Tether today, or even like liquid assets, kind of a similar idea there, right? Is it Stoker, the liquid one?
Yeah, the STO. The security tokens offering stuff. There you always have a cosigner that knows your identity.
I see, yeah.
So your trading partner doesn't need to know, but there's some entity where you have KYC'd, and not a big fan of KYCing in general. So
fair enough.
I kind of still hope someone will build a no KYC STO tool, and then maybe we will actually see some of these federations incorporating as autonomous organizations, like actual Bitcoin DAOs.
Right, like a true anarcho-capitalist Lightning.
Yeah, exactly.
IOU, eCash, bank all merged into one, and people can sort of get some more privacy by being a member or a customer of this, that kind of thing. That's an idea there.
Nobody has to be identified, because it's just software. I'm providing the software, and if some Twitter nyms come together and run such a eCash federation, who is to stop them? Run it behind Tor and okay, good luck, big brother, but...
Right. And I think that's the other aspect as well, because with Bitcoin and privacy, we have to think about it holistically, right? Because it's how did you acquire those coins and how did you spend those coins? Because if you had to KYC to get those coins in the first place, well, it's that's already a big part of the battle being lost right there on the get-go. So I guess the idea potentially, let's say in the future, I mean, this might be years off before this idea even comes to fruition, but it might be that people want to acquire some of their first sats by getting these tokens. Maybe in the future there's peer-to-peer markets, and as an example, you, Eric, want to get started with Bitcoin, and I've got my 100,000 sat eCash token, and you pay me whatever the fiat value of that is in cash, and I sell you this token, and that's your onboarding, that's your no KYC onboarding.
Yeah, exactly. So, and one interesting fact here, you don't have the problem of incoming capacity you have with Lightning. With Lightning, you would need to open a channel first to receive these funds from you. But with federated eCash, and Lightning integration, you have this one Lightning node someone else is running, and presumably they will always keep enough incoming capacity so they can actually collect the fees from allowing you to receive and send funds. So you can actually go to someone who sells Lightning Bitcoin for cash or whatever, or gold coins, and then just receive via Lightning and get eCash tokens in the end.
Yeah, I see.
I think that will be a really smooth onboarding experience because it has low fees. Like Lightning has super low fees. Like all my Lightning transactions are between 0.1 and 0.2% in fees, and then maybe at 0.2% in fees from the Federation or whoever is operating this. But now you can physically buy Bitcoin without any on-chain fees, and I think that will be a nice peer-to-peer future.
Yeah. So to be clear, though, that would require a network effect to be built up around this, right? So as an example, there's nothing stopping people doing this even now with, say, liquid BTC, right? They could be trading LBTC for cash, but it's not like that there's very liquid and, big markets for that today. But the hope is that people could use these MiniMint ideas as a way to potentially onboard into the network in a private way. And then later, when they want to, they can withdraw those coins out into their, let's say they've accumulated a large enough balance of eCash tokens, they can now withdraw that out to their hardware wallet or their multi-sig on-chain, take it back on-chain, and have only the spending amount inside the mint, let's say.
And I'd say there's not even the big bootstrapping problem that Liquid is facing, because if you integrate Lightning from the beginning, then everyone who supports Lightning supports your solution, in that case, Federated eCash. So in I can use all the Lightning infrastructure.
Right. You can piggyback the Lightning network network effect, because you can anyone who can already take a Lightning payment can now receive a payment from the mint.
Yeah,
from the
and everyone who can pay Lightning invoices can suddenly sell me Bitcoin, like without opening a channel to me. Like that's the biggest problem today, and it's solved in different ways. Like I had a great conversation with Fiat Chef and Anton, I think, about hosted channels some weeks ago. And that's another solution, more centralized than Federated eCash, but like we need to solve the onboarding problem with Lightning, because currently, whenever I want to sell Bitcoin to someone physically, it's always on chain, because there's no good way for them, if they have a Lightning wallet, to just receive. Like either it's fully custodial right now, or like we need to open a channel first. Like that's the Phoenix solution, which is also expensive, and we are just doing an on-chain transaction in the end. So there's no way around on-chain.
Yeah.
But with these federations, you have trade-off and new trade-off. Like it's still custodial in a sense, but trust minimized.
Yeah.
And you can receive funds easily.
So one other thing is just thinking through, and maybe this is coming back to the Lightning Gateway idea, just thinking through the balance. Let's say you and me and two other people are setting up a MiniMint, and we have to balance the hot wallet versus the cold, right? So we've kind of got our Lightning Gateway funds, and we've got our cold storage. How do we sort of manage that balance between them? Because isn't it also possible then that if I don't, maybe there's some fancy cryptography thing or something here, but how is it that the users know that we aren't sort of just, going fraudulent with the money and like running kind of like a Lightning node that looks like it makes payments or makes some payments, but actually we've kind of taken some of the Bitcoin for ourselves?
So that's a really good point. There is a reason that the Lightning Gateway is an independent operator. Like they have to come up with additional capital. Like whatever's in Lightning node is not counted towards the backing capital of the Federation.
Right.
And so they're an independent economic actor. And whenever they receive a payment for a user and then tell the Federation, we just received some money for the user, then the Lightning Gateway actually has to give eCash tokens to the Federation so that the Federation can pay the user. And the other way around, if the user wants the Lightning Gateway to pay some invoice, then they have to send these eCash tokens to Lightning Gateway. And so the Lightning Gateway will have some float of eCash and can exchange it for on-chain Bitcoin if they need to. Like if all the transactions are outgoing, then eventually they will have a lot of eCash and no funds in their channels. And so they just withdraw some Bitcoin from the Federation and open a new channel. And that's like their business decision to make, when to do this and how often to do this.
I see. Gotcha. And so their job is essentially to manage the availability, the liquidity,
Exactly.
of the Lightning aspect. And I guess what you're saying is they would be a different person. So let's say it's you, me, and two other people who are running the on-chain aspect of it, the Federated Mint, and some other fifth person is the one running the Lightning Gateway. Is that the model?
Yeah, it could be that way, or it could be one of us, because the beauty of this is the Lightning Gateway isn't really trusted except for uptime. Like, all they have to guarantee is that there are funds in the channels to go in both directions and that they're well connected and always operational.
Right.
But they can steal funds.
Right, but that would also be a competitive aspect, right? Because let's say, okay, as an example, let's say there's some mini-mint and the guy running the Lightning node there is a doofus, right? He has no idea, and he doesn't have, his channels aren't balanced, he doesn't have high uptime, right? And then the users are getting a bad experience, so they're like, oh, this mint sucks, I'm going to go over to, I don't know, Eric's mint, because it's better than, Stephan's mint, because Stephan's mint, they can't manage the Lightning node, right?
You actually wouldn't have to switch the mint. Like, if I was such a great Lightning node operator, which I ain't, like, it's fucking hard. But if I was, like, then I could just connect to the same federation and provide a different Lightning gateway. And if people notice that I'm providing much better service, then they can just use me. Like, whenever you do a Lightning payment, what you do mint internally is you create a smart contract, kind of. And the smart contract says, if someone can present the federation with a pre-image to a certain hash, then they can take the money out of that contract. And they also require a signature with a public key, and the public key essentially identifies the Lightning gateway. So you can't have two Lightning gateways and then, like, one of them also operates a node in front of the other one, and so sees the pre-image to some hash earlier and then can claim some contract, but you also bind it to the Lightning gateway that you expect to receive the invoice. So you can have multiple of these Lightning gateways.
Right. So the short version is each federation could have multiple Lightning gateways. Yeah. And it
could even be permissionless.
And we could maybe think of the Lightning gateways similar to how we think of LSPs, Lightning Service Providers, today.
Exactly. That's pretty good point. Like, the only limitation is that the Lightning gateway has to trust the federation as well. So you don't, as Lightning gateway, you don't want to connect to any to all federations that somehow pop up and just provide your services, because you have to hold the eCash tokens, and so you have this counterparty risk.
I see.
But if you know some federation and trust them enough and think it's profitable, then you can just connect to them, announce that you provide your services there, and people can choose to use you.
I see. So there's like, in some ways, the Federation runners have to trust a little bit the Lightning node or Lightning gateway guy, and the Lightning gateway guy also needs to put a little bit of trust in the Federation guys, because each could sort of run off with the other guy's money, right?
I wouldn't say that the Federation has to trust the Lightning gateway. They don't.
Right.
Like, the users have to some degree, because they trust them to actually make the payment, because otherwise it just times out and the user can take their money back, but they didn't make the payment and it's just annoying. But after your Lightning gateway does this to you once, then you probably switch to another one. So that's not a good business practice, because you don't make any money using these failed payments. So you better be operational.
Yeah, right. Interesting
stuff. So the only trust relationship is the Lightning gateway trusts the Federation, because they hold collateral inside the Federation, necessarily, because they accept eCash tokens in exchange for Lightning payments. So there is some trust in that direction. Users also trust the Federation, but the Federation has to trust no one else.
Yeah, interesting. That's a good point. Yeah, and because they're holding the keys, right? They're holding the coins.
Yeah, they are.
So at the end of the day, they're the ones running the service, right? Well, also the Lightning node guy, but yeah. And then, so how does all this stuff? Have you thought about things like, DOS attacks? Like, what kind of things are there around that? Like, would a MiniMint have to deal with that kind of thing? Like, could people try to, I don't know, turn up and just flood the server with requests?
Definitely. Like, that's actually a big problem, because the cryptography used to generate these threshold signed blind eCash tokens, that's really slow. Like, the verification of one of these tokens takes about 4 milliseconds, and that's a lot of time in CPU timescales. So with only like a few requests per second, a few hundred requests per second, you could totally make the mint inoperable, totally DOS it. So you need to have some way to limit this, but I haven't really invested too much energy into fixing this problem. Because right now I imagine the use of such federations to be a community internal, and that also means that you can restrict access. Like, for example, you have a few people that want to cooperate and use such a federated mint. They all know the same password to it. Like, they can all just share the same password that doesn't change anything in anonymity. Like, if they're all using the same, then you can't distinguish them, but you still limit the availability to outsiders. So pure grieving attacks are pretty much ruled out that way, because like inside your community there might not be an asshole that tries to just take down your federation, because they would hurt themselves and like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Later on, we might want to implement some anti-DOS measures.
Yeah. And what about on-chain fees? Like, who pays them in the model? Like, I guess if I'm depositing sats into I guess I'm paying the on-chain fees for that, but then every time there's a withdrawal, I guess the MiniMint operators are paying for that, right?
Yeah. Like, generally fees inside a federation are up to the federation itself. Like, they can decide to charge whatever fees they want. So, for example, when it comes to on-chain transactions, then you could have a policy that the federation periodically votes on how much withdrawal request costs the user. And they have to manage it in a way that they don't lose money on the withdrawals. So they could always set it like 50% over what they're effectively paying on-chain, so they make a little bit of profit, but still allow people to make rather cheap on-chain withdrawals.
Right, yeah. And so then the idea could be, I mean, hypothetically, people could get together and say, hey, let's run a MiniMint and it'll be a profitable venture. Let's run this as like a business to give privacy and scalability for our users.
Yeah, you could probably try to do this. I'm not sure if it will be successful, because you'd need a really large user base for this to make sense, because users don't like fees. So if you charge too much, then they will probably leave for someone else. And generally, such big federations with a lot of users, like you'd probably need a few million users to make this profitable. Right. If you have full-time people on staff. That isn't my ideal future that I want to build. So initially, there will not be a support for bigger federations, really. Like, it's not something I optimize for.
So you see this as more like a community-hosted node, hosted MiniMint idea?
Definitely initially. Like, ideally it will stay that way, but I also know that market forces tend to prefer like bigger organizations, because they can provide potentially better support or just more development power into user experience and all this stuff. So maybe we will see bigger federations one day. And one thing that was already suggested to me and in a thread about Signal, like Signal and their shitcoin, why not do it with a federated eCash system? Like, that would be pretty cool, and I kind of agree. But then again, like, Signal has this philosophy of not allowing different operators. Like, you can't run your own Signal server and still connect to other Signal users. So they probably wouldn't allow this concept where you connect to whatever federation you want, but they would want to run their own. So that would make it rather centralized. Maybe we'll do this one day, attempt this one day. Maybe not. I don't know. It might be a net positive for Signal users in the end, because then they don't have to use some shitcoin. But ideally, I wouldn't want to see federations larger than maybe 10,000 users.
Yeah. And so what we've been talking about has been, obviously this is very early stage, right? This is all like a theoretical thing. When do you think this kind of idea would actually start in like a basic way, and you know what's needed to get there, right? Do you need like community support, or what are you looking for?
Yeah, right now it's still under heavy development. So generally, people who like to develop software in Rust and like Bitcoin and Lightning, please check out MiniMint. That's github.com/fedimint/MiniMint. You'll probably also put it in the show notes, I guess. So yeah. And currently my plan is to have some sort of closed prototype running end of next year, like hopefully in October, because then there's the next Hackers Congress Parallelnipolis in Prague. And like last year, I already bought a coffee with a really hacky setup and fake like rec test and the Lightning integration, where the Lightning node was running on mainnet and Lightning node was paid using reg test tokens and then paying a mainnet Lightning invoice. So it's super hacky setup, but it worked. And it was pretty amazing to see the first transaction go through for a real product. But next time, ideally, I want to do it for real and have a running federation that a few people can connect to. And then maybe in 2 or 3 years, we will see the first mainstream applications of this technology. But till then, a lot of bugs have to be figured out. Like the UX has to be completely reinvented because it's just such a different approach having these eCash tokens to other versions of how to interact with Bitcoin. And that needs to be a lot of research.
Yeah, but potentially quite a promising idea in terms of scalability because long term, we know, projecting out, 10, 15, 20 years out, we know not every person on Earth can have a UTXO. That's just going to blow out the UTXO set in Bitcoin. So we need ideas that relate to people being able to share coins and ideally have other trade-offs around how they do that. So this is one idea. Obviously, the multi-party channels is another one, and there are a few other ideas out there, but it's an interesting one from a longer-term perspective. At least that's how I'm seeing it. So any thoughts, any final thoughts there for the listeners? Why should they look into this?
It's a really amazing opportunity here that we have to both give you the scalability and at the same time make privacy the most user-friendly option. And that's, I think, what is needed, because you will never get people to seek out privacy for privacy's sake. But if we build this new scaling technology for Bitcoin, which will be relevant in the next 5 to 10 years, to include privacy by default, we might win this privacy battle. And we might get most people to use private means of transaction instead of banks and KYC and surveillance.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Because what matters is by default. And if people can default use this, it's easy and it's more private, then that's a pretty big win.
Yeah, and it's cheaper.
Right.
That's what will bring the users in the end. It's easy and it's cheap, and that it's private, it's a nice side effect.
Fantastic.
And that's how we win.
Yeah, that's how we win. Thank you. So, Eric, where can people find you online? Obviously, there's the GitHub link, and anywhere else you'd like people to find you?
Mostly twitter.com/Eric Sirion. You'll probably put a link for that in there too. And I also, on fedimint.org, I have some more resources about the general concept of federated German eCash, and also a link to a Telegram group. You might link to it too. I saw you joined yesterday, so that is a great place if you're interested in the concept but didn't understand something. Then just go there, ask about it, and I'm there. Max Hillebrand is there. He is also quite excited and was one of my earliest supporters. And someone of us will answer your questions.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the idea coming to fruition, and thanks for joining me, Eric.
Yes, thank you very much for having me on. It was a blast. Then see you again. See you in the Citadels.
See you in the Citadels. Get the show notes at stephanlivera.com. If you're enjoying the show, make sure you leave a review and you share the show with your family and friends. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the Citadels.